The laboratory lights burned late into the New Mexico night as scientists worked on the most secret project in human history. Coffee cups lined workbenches covered in classified equations. Guards with machine guns patrolled the perimeter of a facility that officially didn't exist. In one corner of the laboratory, a quiet German physicist named Klaus Fuchs calculated plutonium implosion dynamics with precision that impressed even Robert Oppenheimer. In exactly 18 months, the atomic bomb would end World War II and reshape global power forever. What none of his colleagues knew, what the security officials screening everyone who entered Los Alamos didn't know, was that every night Klaus Fuchs memorized the day's discoveries and prepared to hand them to Soviet intelligence. The man working alongside America's greatest minds to build the atomic bomb was simultaneously giving Joseph Stalin everything he needed to build his own. This is the story of how one scientist's ideology cost America its nuclear monopoly, started the arms race that nearly destroyed the world, and did it all for just $50,000. Klaus Fuchs didn't look like a spy. He looked like what he was, a brilliant theoretical physicist with thick glasses, slight build, and quiet demeanor that made him nearly invisible in group settings. Born in Germany in 1911, Fuchs had fled Nazi persecution in 1933 as a Communist Party member. He found refuge in Britain, earned his Ph.D. in physics from the University of Edinburgh, and by 1941 had become valuable enough to British nuclear research that he was granted citizenship despite his communist past. The British security services had investigated Fuchs's political background. They knew he'd been a communist in Germany, but they concluded, catastrophically, that his hatred of Nazis meant he would be loyal to the Allied cause. They failed to understand that Fuchs's loyalty was to communism first and everything else second. In 1941, Fuchs was recruited to work on the British atomic bomb project, codenamed Tube Alloys. His mathematical skills were exceptional. He could solve differential equations in his head that other physicists took hours with paper and pencil. His work on gaseous diffusion for uranium enrichment was groundbreaking. He was exactly the kind of scientist the Manhattan Project needed. He was also exactly the kind of asset Soviet intelligence had been desperately seeking. In August 1941, just months after beginning classified nuclear work, Fuchs contacted Soviet intelligence through a Communist Party intermediary. His message was simple. He had access to British atomic research and wanted to share it with the Soviet Union. He wanted no money, he wanted no recognition, he wanted only to ensure that the Soviet Union, fighting desperately against Nazi invasion, would not be left defenseless in a post-war world where the West held atomic weapons. Soviet intelligence could barely believe their luck. They had spent years trying to penetrate Western nuclear programs with minimal success. Now a scientist with direct access was volunteering. The NKGB, Soviet intelligence, assigned him the codename Charles and established contact protocols. Fuchs would meet a courier at predetermined locations in Britain. He would pass handwritten notes containing technical data. The courier would never know Fuchs's real identity. Fuchs would never know the courier's real name. Between 1941 and 1943, Fuchs passed British atomic research to the Soviets at regular intervals. He gave them theoretical work on uranium enrichment, calculations on critical mass, and design concepts for bomb cores. This information, later analysis would show, advanced Soviet nuclear research by at least 2 years. But the real breakthrough came in December 1943, when Fuchs was selected to join the British delegation to the Manhattan Project in Los Alamos, New Mexico. The Los Alamos laboratory, built on a remote mesa in the New Mexico desert, housed the greatest concentration of scientific genius ever assembled. J. Robert Oppenheimer directed a team that included multiple Nobel Prize winners and the best physicists from America and Britain. Security was supposedly airtight. Everyone was background checked, monitored, and forbidden from discussing their work outside the facility. Yet Klaus Fuchs, communist spy, sailed through security screening because British intelligence vouched for him. He arrived at Los Alamos in August 1944 and was immediately assigned to the theoretical division working on implosion dynamics, the most critical and difficult aspect of plutonium bomb design. The Manhattan Project faced a fundamental problem. Uranium bombs, using U-235, were relatively simple. You just slammed 2 pieces of uranium together fast enough to create critical mass. But plutonium bombs required compressing a plutonium sphere using conventional explosives, creating an implosion that would trigger a chain reaction. The physics and engineering were extraordinarily complex. Fuchs was assigned to calculate exactly how shaped explosive charges needed to be arranged and timed to compress plutonium uniformly. This was the key to making plutonium bombs work, and Fuchs was giving it all to the Soviets. In February 1945, Fuchs took a brief vacation to his sister's home in Cambridge, Massachusetts. On a Saturday afternoon, he walked to a specific street corner and waited. A man approached, exchanged recognition signals, and the two walked together through Cambridge streets. The man was Harry Gold, a courier for Soviet intelligence. Fuchs handed Gold a packet of documents containing detailed technical data on plutonium bomb implosion. Gold later testified that Fuchs seemed nervous but determined. He said he believed the Soviets deserved to have the same weapons as the West to maintain balance of power. He said he trusted the Soviet Union would use atomic weapons only for defense. Gold took the documents to New York, photographed them, and transmitted the photographs to Soviet intelligence through diplomatic channels. Within weeks, Soviet physicists were reading detailed American research on the exact problem they had been struggling with. The information Fuchs provided in early 1945 was later assessed by American intelligence as equivalent to what the entire Soviet nuclear program would have taken 2 to 3 years to develop independently. But Fuchs wasn't finished. In June 1945, Fuchs met Gold again, this time in Santa Fe. He provided updated calculations on implosion dynamics, information on the Trinity test being planned for July, and sketches of the plutonium bomb's core design. On July 16, 1945, Fuchs watched from 20 miles away as the first atomic bomb detonated at the Trinity site. The explosion, equivalent to 22,000 tons of TNT, created a fireball visible from 200 miles away. Oppenheimer famously quoted the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, destroyer of worlds." Fuchs thought about how soon the Soviet Union would have the same capability. In August 1945, atomic bombs destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The war ended. America stood alone with atomic weapons, seemingly invincible. President Truman believed America's nuclear monopoly would last at least a decade, giving the United States unprecedented global power. Fuchs knew better. He knew that the Soviets had everything they needed to build their own bomb within 4 years. In September 1945, Fuchs met Gold the last time in Santa Fe. He provided final technical details on the Fat Man plutonium bomb dropped on Nagasaki, including precise specifications on the explosive lenses that had created the implosion. Gold asked if Fuchs wanted payment for his espionage. Fuchs had received only $400 over 4 years, small payments the Soviets insisted on giving him despite his refusals. He told Gold he didn't want money. He wanted equality among nations. Gold shook his hand and disappeared. They would never meet again. Fuchs returned to Britain in 1946 as a hero of British atomic research. He was appointed head of the Theoretical Physics Division at the British Atomic Research Facility at Harwell. He had full access to British nuclear weapons development, and he continued spying. Between 1947 and 1949, Fuchs met periodically with Soviet couriers in Britain, passing information on British atomic weapons development and theoretical work that could be applied to hydrogen bomb research. The Soviets, using his information plus their own research, made rapid progress on their atomic bomb program. On August 29, 1949, the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb, Jo-1, at the Semipalatinsk test site in Kazakhstan. The explosion shocked the world. American intelligence had predicted the Soviets wouldn't have a bomb until 1953 at the earliest. President Truman initially refused to believe the reports. How could the Soviets have developed atomic weapons so quickly? The answer was sitting in an office at Harwell, reviewing theoretical papers on thermonuclear weapons.
The break in the fuse case came not from brilliant counterintelligence work, but from Soviet carelessness. In 1949, the U.S. Army's Signal Intelligence Service, working on a project codenamed the Nona, succeeded in partially decrypting Soviet intelligence cables from the 1940s. The cables were fragmentary, containing code names without real identities, but they revealed that the Soviets had penetrated the Manhattan Project with multiple spies. One cable from 1944 referenced a Soviet source codenamed Charles, who had provided detailed technical information from Los Alamos. The cable mentioned Charles had a sister living in Cambridge, Massachusetts. FBI and British intelligence began cross-referencing Manhattan Project personnel who had sisters in Cambridge. The list was short. Klaus Fuchs was on it. In September 1949, MI5 assigned William Scarton, one of Britain's best interrogators, to investigate Fuchs. Skardon's approach was subtle. He arranged a friendly meeting with Fuchs, ostensibly to discuss routine security matters. He mentioned that some concerns had been raised about Fuchs's communist past. Nothing serious, just standard review. Fuchs was calm, cooperative, and gave no indication of guilt. Skardon reported that Fuchs seemed genuinely loyal to Britain. But Skardon was experienced enough to notice small inconsistencies in Fuchs's statements about his past. He recommended continued investigation. Over the next 3 months, MI5 built a circumstantial case. They documented that Fuchs had taken trips to Cambridge that matched dates and Soviet cables. They confirmed he had the technical knowledge to provide the information referenced in the cables. They established that his communist background was more extensive than he disclosed. But they lacked proof. The Venona decrypt couldn't be used in court without revealing to the Soviets that their codes had been broken. They needed a confession. On December 21, 1949, Skardon met with Fuchs again, this time at Harwell. The conversation lasted 4 hours. Skardon presented what MI5 knew, leaving Fuchs to infer they had more evidence than they actually possessed. He appealed to Fuchs's conscience, suggesting that if Fuchs had shared information to help the Soviets during the war against Hitler, that could be understood, but surely he could see that continuing afterward was betrayal. Fuchs said nothing incriminating, but appeared shaken. Skardon left thinking Fuchs was close to breaking. On January 13, 1950, Skardon returned to Harwell for a third interview. This time, Fuchs was ready. "I have something to tell you," he began. What followed was one of the most damaging confessions in intelligence history. Fuchs admitted everything. He confirmed he had spied for the Soviet Union from 1941 to 1949. He described passing atomic secrets from both the British and American nuclear programs. He detailed his meetings with Soviet couriers. He explained his motivation, that he believed the Soviet Union deserved to have atomic weapons to balance Western power. What Fuchs didn't do was express remorse. He told Skardon he had acted according to his principles. He believed he had done the right thing, though he understood British law defined it as treason. He seemed almost relieved to finally admit what he'd been carrying secretly for 9 years. The confession was taken down in writing and signed. MI5 arrested Fuchs on February 2, 1950. The arrest remained secret for several days while intelligence services assessed the damage and attempted to identify Fuchs's Soviet contacts. The FBI, working from Fuchs's description of his American courier, eventually identified Harry Gold, who confessed and provided information that led to other atomic spies, including David Greenglass and ultimately Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. When news of Fuchs's arrest broke on February 3, 1950, it caused international sensation. The revelation that a trusted scientist had given atomic secrets to the Soviets shocked the Western public and triggered a spy panic in Britain and America. The trial of Klaus Fuchs began on March 1, 1950 at the Old Bailey in London. It lasted less than 90 minutes. Fuchs pleaded guilty to 4 counts of violating the Official Secrets Act by communicating information to a potential enemy. His lawyer presented no defense, only mitigation, arguing that Fuchs had acted from misguided ideology rather than malice. The Lord Chief Justice, in sentencing, called Fuchs's betrayal one of the most serious crimes that can be committed. He sentenced Fuchs to 14 years imprisonment, the maximum allowed under British law at the time. Treason charges, which could have carried the death penalty, were not pursued because Fuchs had spied for an ally during wartime. The brief trial and relatively light sentence outraged many in America and Britain who believed Fuchs should have been executed.
The full extent of damage caused by Klaus Fuchs's espionage took years to assess. American and British intelligence agencies conducted exhaustive analysis of what he had access to and what he likely passed to the Soviets. The conclusions were devastating. Fuchs had given the Soviets detailed information on gaseous diffusion for uranium enrichment, saving them years of research on this critical process. He had provided complete technical data on plutonium bomb implosion dynamics, the most difficult aspect of nuclear weapons design. He had given them the design of the Fat Man bomb, including specifications for the explosive lens and plutonium core. He had shared theoretical work on thermonuclear weapons, giving the Soviets a head start on hydrogen bomb development. American scientists who reviewed what Fuchs had passed estimated he had advanced the Soviet nuclear program by at least 2 years, possibly 3 or 4. This had profound strategic consequences. If the Soviet Union hadn't tested an atomic bomb until 1952 or 1953, as American intelligence had predicted, the entire early Cold War would have unfolded differently. The Korean War might not have occurred, as Stalin would have been less confident confronting America without atomic weapons.
The arms race might have been less intense if America had maintained nuclear monopoly longer. Most significantly, Fuchs's espionage meant that the brief period when America could have used atomic weapons to dictate terms to the Soviet Union, a period some historians believe could have prevented the Cold War, was far shorter than anyone realized. By the time American policymakers understood they had a window of opportunity, the window was already closing because Fuchs had given Stalin the keys. The psychological impact was equally significant. The revelation that a trusted scientist had betrayed the Manhattan Project triggered paranoia about security and loyalty that poisoned American and British scientific communities for decades. J. Robert Oppenheimer, who had supervised Fuchs at Los Alamos, found his own loyalty questioned during the McCarthy era, partly because he had failed to detect Fuchs's espionage. Thousands of scientists faced loyalty investigations, research was slowed by security restrictions. International scientific cooperation, which had flourished before the Fuchs case, was severely restricted. The cost of Fuchs's betrayal was measured not just in lost strategic advantage, but in damaged trust and constrained science. Fuchs served 9 years of his 14-year sentence in British prisons. He was released in 1959 and immediately moved to East Germany, where he was welcomed as a hero and appointed deputy director of the Central Institute for Nuclear Research. He continued working on peaceful nuclear applications until his retirement in 1979. He died in East Germany in 1988, never having expressed regret for his espionage. In interviews with East German media, Fuchs maintained that he had acted correctly according to his principles. He argued that giving atomic secrets to the Soviet Union had created balance that prevented nuclear war. He claimed that if America had maintained nuclear monopoly, it would have used atomic weapons against the Soviet Union. This rationalization ignored that his espionage had directly enabled the arms race that brought the world repeatedly to the brink of nuclear war. The hydrogen bomb race, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the decades of mutual terror that defined the Cold War, all were possible because Fuchs and other spies had given the Soviets atomic weapons capability years before they could have developed it independently. Intelligence officials who studied the Fuchs case identified multiple failures that had enabled his espionage. British security services had cleared him despite his communist background, assuming his hatred of Nazis made him trustworthy. American security at Los Alamos had accepted British vouching for him without independent verification. Neither country had adequate monitoring of scientists' movements or contacts during the war years when everyone was focused on beating Germany. The Fuchs case led to complete overhaul of security procedures for classified research. Background checks became far more rigorous. Scientists working on classified projects faced continuous monitoring. International cooperation on sensitive projects required extensive security agreements. These changes were necessary, but carried costs in efficiency and scientific openness that persist today. Perhaps most disturbing was how little money changed hands. Fuchs had received approximately $400 over 8 years of espionage, about $50 per year in 1940s money. The Soviets had offered him more, but he refused, insisting he was motivated by ideology, not profit. For comparison, Julius Rosenberg, who provided less valuable information than Fuchs, received approximately $10,000. Fuchs's minimal payment actually made his espionage more damaging because it was harder to detect. Intelligence agencies could track large payments, but Fuchs had no suspicious income, no unexplained wealth, nothing that would trigger financial investigation. The FBI calculated that if Fuchs had been paid fair market value for the information he provided, based on what it would have cost the Soviet Union to develop independently, the figure would exceed $2 billion in 1940s dollars. He had given away information worth billions for a few $100s and ideological satisfaction. The title of this story references $50,000 as what Fuchs was paid. This is the commonly cited figure in popular accounts, though actual documented payments were far less. The larger figure may represent estimated total value of payments and benefits, or may simply be historical error that became accepted. Regardless of exact amount, the point remains that Fuchs betrayed atomic secrets for a pittance compared to their strategic value. The Soviet atomic bomb program's success vindicated Fuchs's confidence in Soviet science to some extent.
Soviet physicists, including Igor Kurchatov, who led their bomb program, were brilliant scientists who would have eventually developed atomic weapons independently. But eventually mattered enormously in the late 1940s, when American and Soviet relations were deteriorating rapidly. The 2 to 4 years Fuchs saved the Soviets meant they had atomic weapons during the Korean War, during the Berlin crisis, during the formation of NATO and the Warsaw Pact. Those years shaped the Cold War's entire structure. Some historians argue that Fuchs's espionage by creating earlier nuclear parity actually prevented World War III, by ensuring America couldn't use atomic threats as casually as it might have with continued nuclear monopoly. This argument suggests Fuchs's betrayal had a perversely beneficial effect in creating deterrence sooner. This view is controversial and ignores that the arms race Fuchs helped start nearly destroyed civilization multiple times during the Cold War. The question of whether Fuchs's espionage ultimately helped or hurt global security remains debated. What is not debatable is that he violated trust, betrayed his colleagues, and changed history in ways he neither intended nor foresaw. He believed he was preventing Western domination. He actually helped create the nuclear standoff that terrorized the world for decades. The spy who sold America's atomic secrets for nearly nothing helped build the nuclear terror that defined the second half of the 20th century. He believed he was creating balance. He created an arms race that brought humanity repeatedly to the edge of extinction. That is the true cost of Fuchs's espionage, measured not in dollars, but in decades of nuclear fear that shaped and scarred the modern world.